is something to be said about having a work day, which
Hmm.
I know is kind of funny for when you're working at home, but I really learned that from my PhD. So,
I feel like especially people who are sort of early career, starting to do reviews and maybe facilitate reading series and starting to get their first couple of chapbooks, and then they, ask to guest edit something. I mean,
mhm.
it's difficult to say no early on because you feel like, what door did I just close? Where
Yeah, but I would say to you, yes, you can say yes to everything, but then that's how you burn out. And I learned that very early on. Like I taught grade 7, so I know what burnout is because in 3 years I was done. So I was burnt out, I was tired, and there was no room for poetry in those 3 years. Like, and I remember very clearly having a moment where I was like, wow, I could be teaching grade 7 and 8 for the rest of my life, which wouldn't have been a bad gig. Um, and although right now I feel for all the teachers and students who are going back, I mean, yeah, I feel for all of them. But at the same time, I think I could have been doing that, but I thought, well, the one thing that's missing is having a poetry life. And teaching grade 7 and 8 they don't allow you to sort of step out in the middle of the day to go do an interview, or they don't allow you to, step out and do something else. Like it's a different kind of system. And it was way back then. Maybe there's some more room now. I'm not sure. But I actually mentor people and say, don't do everything. Do what feels that's going to fuel you. Right. And if it takes over your life, then that's a problem, right? Especially if you're not being paid. I'm a big component of people getting paid. Like people who don't get paid gigs, that drives me crazy. And that's actually something at CV2 that we do.
yeah.
And I don't know if people know that. Like we're a little magazine. We're actually not that little, but we're a little magazine in the middle of Winnipeg. We try very hard to make sure that we pay all our writers, whether that's through a subscription or through, monies, right? We pay our reviewers, we pay for everybody that's in the office. Everyone gets something. We have a paid staff, and they read stuff with, proofreaders, all of that. Like we do try to pay everybody because this is work, and it's a different kind of work. And so that, I know that there are other magazines, like especially Ontario, sometimes, in the prairies, we look over to like Toronto and go, oh, they've got a lot of money over there. We can't do that here, but here's what we can do. And so that's, I think, what we've been trying to do. But we have like a magazine that has been going strong for the last 48 years. I can't remember the date, but we've been doing, it's been doing well. And I think people are only now coming to contemporary verse too. We're going through a bit of a website change in a way. And I think I think it's gonna do well. We've always sort of honored, especially back, like I've had a couple of moments with CV2. So like back in 1999, it was going to go under. Clarice phoned me and said, I need a board. I've heard your name around. I need a board to put together so we can close the magazine because it was going to shut down. And then there was a small group of us that said, no, we shouldn't shut this down. We should try to revitalize it. Let's get it back on its leg. And Clarice has been the person to do that. Clarice has been, with her guidance and with her knowledge and know-how, she's been really steering that ship. So it's been fantastic. So it's had its, moments in the sun. It's had its 45, anniversary. We've, celebrated that in Winnipeg, which I think was fantastic. We've done all sorts of issues across, like we did an Indigenous issue years before anyone did. We did a queer issue. We've done feminist issues. We've done so many poetry issues that it's fantastic. But at the same time, we're in Winnipeg, right? And so we're not the first thing that people think of when, they're going to send poetry in, right? Like, especially in Ontario or Vancouver, Montreal to some degree, they don't think of us. They think of the other big names, right? So I think in the next little while, I hope that, we are ushering in a new sort of genre, or not genre, but a new revitalization for poetry across the prairies. Because in the last little while too, we've also done the BIPOC workshops, which have been very successful. And, you know, we have continued them. I've talked to Shanice Jah Mohammed, Doyali has also come to Winnipeg to do a workshop. We've had Joshua Whitehead, who is also now editing an issue. So I feel like what we're doing is we're building, and we're, you know, reaching out and talking to poets and saying, what would you like to do? I would love for Shanice Jah Mohammed to do a Sophie poetry issue. You know, Phoebe Wang, who's an amazing poet. You know, I've been talking to her about maybe doing, you know, Chinese poetry on the prairies. But these are all kind of conversations that we're having. And not to say that we're only going to do themed issues or, you know, those issues, but we have 4 issues to fill every year, right? So we're a quarterly magazine. And so, you know, we have all these great ideas that we want to sort of keep rolling, and keep with having 4 issues every year. So sorry, I'm just like,
Oh,
just.
really? So I'm just going to say, just out of a perfunctory obligation, with one of the 3 poetry editors for Contemporary Verse to the Canadian Journal of Poetry and Critical Writing, Sharon Paul Roux-Pry. This is episode 11 of Talking with the Presses. Now we can continue conversation.
Sounds good. But I'm one of 4 actually, because Clarice still does read things. So there's Clarice, Chim, and Hannah. So.
Yeah, I wanted to mention the names of the current CV2 staff, and correct me if I'm wrong, of course, but Clarice Foster, Emily Dirksen Poirier, Chelsea Peters, Ashley Au, Melody Morissette, Chimwemwe Undi, and Hannah Green.
Yep.
So I wonder.
And there's, yeah, Ashley. Yeah. Okay.
I wonder whether you'd say a word about when you joined CV2's editorial board and how you'd characterize the energy or ethos of the board at that time. You'd mentioned Clarice's leadership, and yeah, what was it like walking into that group that was, I think, did it feel like it was sort of fully formed, or it was close to the rocks a little bit? You said it.
Yeah, no, I think I've been involved with CV2 for a couple of years now. It wasn't fully, it has been fully formed in the sense that we have Clarice to sort of, you know, lead us in a direction. And then she's very much open to having other people come in, right, and revitalizing the magazine and having those kind of conversations. We also have a board that also, you know, says, oh, we're thinking about this, or we're doing this, or, you know, trying to bring everybody on board. So she's been really fantastic. Clarice is also a fine poet, and she's going to be, you know, she's sort of making her ways to retire from, you know, poetry editor from CV2. But at the same time, she knows that, you know, if she doesn't hold our hands a little bit, you know, we might get lost, right? But so she's doing that. We're always looking for poetry readers, but again, we pay our poetry readers. So, you know, we're looking for poetry readers that are going to stay with us for, you know, a year or maybe 2, so that we can sort of gauge. We're always looking for people who have a keen eye with poetry as well. Like, what are they looking for? I mean, what are the things that sort of, you know, bring to light? So I worked with Jennifer Still, for example, the first year that I was poetry editor, like one of the poetry editors. And Jennifer has such a great just knowledge of words and vocabulary. And she just like loved all these like different kinds of feelings and textures. And she was also doing an art class. And that was sort of, you know, we were kind of reading and things were coming into light. So, you know, we're always bringing in the fresh and the new, right? And it's not necessarily emerging poets, like the, you know, new poets. It's, you know, talking to older poets as well, people who have, you know, 10 books, you know, whatever. But, you know, asking them, okay, what do you think? Let's, you know, put them into the mix and have a conversation. So yeah, it's not a fully formed, we're always, you know, we have 2 new board members coming on, I think this year. I sit on the board as well, because I think it's important that poetry editors get, that's how I started actually. I was on the board first before I was poetry editor, but it's been good to know everything. And I think, you know, Hannah, for example, Chim was on the board before, and now she's poetry editor. Hannah has been on the board and now is poetry editor. She's also gone on to do an MFA. Chim is also a lawyer, so she, we've seen her sort of her beautiful career, not just in law, but going through school and picking up, Black Lives Matter within Winnipeg, which is something close to her heart. If I could speak for her for 5 seconds. And it's been really great, actually. So, we're always trying to build, and we're looking, to the future and think, okay, who can we bring on, right? Who's out there who wants to be part of this group. And it's not necessarily a group, it's not a cliquey kind of group. We try to really, we have, this whole summer has been fantastic because we've been meeting like once a week, which sounds kind of boring, but at the same time, we've been meeting to like talk about the magazine, talk about what's being submitted, talk about how we want to change things as we need a new website update. We're probably one of a few magazines across Canada that has office space. So poor Ashley had to go into the office to collect the big computer and bring it home so that, because everything's on that computer. So, I mean, we have, a good camaraderie between all of us. And it's like the highlight of, look, we just had a meeting this morning. It's the highlight of our week, right? That even though it's work, it's hard work. It's our work that we're doing. So it's just been so fun to sort of go back and forth and think about all the issues that we've done and think about a new website and what that might look like. So
you mentioned Black Lives Matter and the importance of supporting BIPOC and QPOC writers. And, more than ever, these are questions that, or these are absolutely fundamental to a conversation that I can't really say it's national, because another component of this is recognizing First Nations. But it seems to me that there's a possibility that when you get together for those weekly meetings, that you'd be doing what you can to sort of judo the moment into art. Does that at all resonate with you? And if not, or if so, could you sort of characterize what those weekly meetings are like?
We do talk about what's going on in the world, of course. We don't always like to do issues that are of the moment. And partly because we're a quarterly magazine, we have to plan out our year. We're in a situation now where we'd like to plan out the next 2 years, right? So it's a little difficult for us to go, well, this is going to be the next, wave of, within a month. And I think that has been good because it has sustained us for 40 plus years, right? That kind of leadership to say, we're going to we want to publish what's good. Having said that, Joshua Whitehead, I had asked him, I think it was even last year when he was doing the BIPOC or the QPOC workshops. He lives in Calgary, but we sent him to Winnipeg for a week or two. And he participated in the workshop and he said, there's some great work here. And I said, well, would you like to curate an issue? And he said, yes. What would that look like? And he had not done that before with CV2. So we talked about it, and that was last year, and it's still not published, right? Because we're still having submissions until September 15th, I think. And so that kind of conversation, relationships, those take time, right? And so we're doing that work. And so with, Black Lives Matter, for example, we were thinking about it and we thought, well, we could do a Black issue, but who can we talk to? So I talked to Chim, I'm like, we're kind of thinking about this. What do you think? Have you thought about it? Would you like to? And she jumped at the chance and thought, I would love to do this. And so handing that over, handing over the issue to her, it's going to be in great hands, right? I think it's going to be fantastic. But we've done that before as a magazine. We've done feminist issues. We've done an indigenous issue. We're always doing that. We're always sort of going, okay, how can we help? How can we support? How can we curate the next generation of poets, right? I think that's important. And those weekly meetings are fun. We laugh a lot, actually. Chelsea is fantastic in keeping us, you know, kind of online and in tow, but at the same time, we have great conversations about what's in the now, right? And in terms of the poetry editors, Chim and Hannah, myself, Chelsea, and even Emily also, and Clarice, we look at what's going on out there, and we think, okay, who can we, you know, tap on the shoulder and say, would you like to participate in this, right? But again, we also look at our finances and say, do we have money for this? Is this something that we can afford to do? Because we want to be able to do it well. When we had Doyali come out to do the reading, she was on the cover. She came and did a reading, and she did a workshop. We wanted to make sure that we can support her in that. We wanted to support her books, so we, you know, bought books for everybody. Same with Joshua, same with Shanice. We wanted to support that kind of work that was being done. And we've been doing that all along. So
excellent.
Yeah.
I mean, this is something that I've been thinking about a lot lately, is how it's a sort of tension between this well-trod cliche that if you do what you love, you'll never have to work a day in your life, and yet so many of us who are doing what we love need to work in addition to doing what we love in order to keep the lights on. And it seems as if maybe to some extent we've kind of been taught that the only labor that's of value that can be compensated is labor that's extracted from us by sort of enormous corporations, as opposed to, I don't mean to get too political, but anyway, it's just admirable and very important, and we're doing what we can to follow suit with Poetry London as well.
Yeah, it's hard work. I mean, it's not, but again, I think all of us love it, and that's why we're doing it. It is hard work, and we do sort of, you know, Clarice has always said, like, I don't want people to burn out, so we need to find 3 more people. And, you know, and I say that to people, like, okay, if we can, you know, support, but we're going to support you, and then we want 3 more people with you, right? Like, we need to clone ourselves, right? Because, you know, we're not going to be able to do this work all the time. And, you know, in a way, Clarice has really managed that ship for a very long time, but she's also been supported by, you know, Catherine Hunter, the department at the University of Winnipeg and at the University of Manitoba. She's always looked for, you know, students who might, you know, want to keep doing this work. So she's always had an eye on not just the universities, but also within the communities, right? So it's trying to find those places, but also, you know, we want to be able to pay writers as well. So it's tough, I know. And I know that millennials, I guess you're a millennial, I don't know, I'm not, so we'll go with that. Okay. I think you do what you love, but also I've always said you have to be paid. You have to be able to sustain yourself in some way. So.
And on that point too, in addition to the quarterly CV2 annual awards, the Young Buck Prize open to entrants 35 years old and under, and the Lena Chartrand Poetry Award, and hosts the annual 2-day poem contest. I think that there are prizes involved with each of those.
Yeah.
Cash prizes, and in addition to prizes of prestige and
the prestige, yeah. The 2-day poetry contest, and the words that they come up with, like Hannah, like all of them, they blew me away with all the words this year. I was like, I was always amazed. I kind of left it because I was like, I don't want to know. And then I got all the words, and I was like, what is this? And then I might have been the second reader or the third reader, and to send it off to the judge, and I was like, these are really good. Like I was really kind of expecting not so good poems, but no, they were really good. Because when you open it up, right, and you have only these words and only, you know, this time frame, it's
yeah. So for those who might be unfamiliar with the 2-day contest, essentially you're given 10 words. Is it like Friday evening, and then you have to have the poem submitted by Sunday at midnight or something like that?
Yeah. Very
short period of time to incorporate a limited vocabulary.
Yeah. And they're fun words. Like, I mean, I don't want to take away, like, I mean, they're complex words, and they have a lot of fun getting them together. Like, yeah. They have a riot collecting all the words and saying what words they want to put together. So Yeah. Hannah was
Um,
sort of in charge of that this year. And I think if I read one more poem about a pigeon, though, I might lose my mind.
no pigeon poems, please.
Okay. Yeah.
The word genre came up earlier, and I read in an interview that you had said plays, short stories, poems, these are different genres, but for me, they're all about storytelling. And as CB2 publishes poetry, interviews, essays, and reviews, I
Hmm.
wonder if you'd say a word or two about genre, perhaps those genres CB2 publishes, the value of each, and what they share.
Um, so we only publish poetry, prose, any kind of, formal form poetry. Sometimes there's a haiku in there, I'm sure. But we're not publishing short stories. We don't publish
Right.
um, novels or novellas, one page poems. We don't do like, we only focus on poetry. And that's really going back to Dorothy Livesday when she started the magazine, saying that she just wanted to look at poetry. We just wanted to look at poetry as well, and we thought, let's be that magazine. We thought, the idea of engaging in work that's across, not just across the country but also internationally,
Mm.
that is, poetic work, um, that takes a lot. Like, it's still, we still get a lot of people who, we're their first submission, right? And they've like sent in this poem, and it's beautiful and it's crafted, and it gets published in CB2, and you just know the joy that it's going to happen, right? Like, we all love that submission where you're like, oh yeah, this is going to be so good. Um, yeah. So and the interviews that we have with poetry have been fantastic. Like, I remember interviewing Gregory Schofield many years ago. And he was just so beautiful and kind, and just talking about his work and the way that he came to it, like with textiles and beads, and, his family history that was weaved into all of those poems was just beautiful. Another one I'm sort of thinking about too is Rosanna Deerchild, who we published, you know, her work along with the Cree, is it, oh, please let me get that right, the translations of her work. And, one of the things that with Rosanna, she's in Winnipeg, she's a big name, she's a huge name in Indigenous writing, international. She will be humble and say that she's not, but she really is.
Mm.
Um, she has been a champion of us. Like, we've loved her work, and she was on the cover, and she's like, "You put me on the cover?" I'm like, "Yeah, we did." But it's been, those kind of interviews, I think people read them and realize that there's a whole life behind a poet, right? And
Mm.
those interviews and crafting them and asking those questions is a joy. The reviews of poetry books, like, so every journal, I'm sure, everybody gets millions of poetry books. Which ones do you review? Which ones do you not review?
Mm.
We're really trying to make an effort to have critical reviews of that work. We're still learning and managing that, but I think, Hannah and Clarice they've done a really great job at like reaching out and going, okay, what books are people reading?
Mm.
What do you want to hear? How do you want to engage in that work? And sort of, saying to younger, I don't want to say younger, but emerging writers to say, do you want to review this for us?
Mm.
And yes, we will pay you some money to do that. I think has been really great. With each of the issues going forward, I've asked Joshua, for example, are there any Indigenous two-spirited work, queer people of color work that's coming up that you know of that you would like to review or that you'd like to interview?
Mm.
So we've had that kind of conversation. And so he's like, oh, I didn't even think of this. And maybe this person. And so he's doing a little networking, behind the scenes to see, oh, maybe this person might have some work. I think his conversation with Tommy Pico, which was yesterday, I'm like, I texted him this morning, like, did you ask him to send some work in? Because we've had his work in our journal before. So I think that kind of excitement about poetry and that kind of joy, I think that's fantastic.
Mm.
Yeah.
I mean, you'd mentioned interviews and its sort of excitement and joy and the ability to elicit from people impassioned speech from their area of specialization. that
Mhm.
that I really enjoy about interviews, and soliciting interviews, conducting conversations, participating in conversations.
Conversations. Yeah.
So I wonder, how do you go about the process of interviewing someone? What is something that you keep in mind? And if you were interviewing yourself right now, what question would you ask?
Oh, very funny. Well, okay, so here's the thing. This drives Clues crazy, but I like to do interviews face to face with a recorder, which then means you have to take the recording and then you have to go in, right? Yeah, exactly. Because I think it's just like the interview that I did with Rosanna, for example, the most recent one. We were we were eating dim sum. We went and had dim sum, and we kept getting interrupted by the person coming with the cart. But at the same time, I was like, oh my God, this is so funny. Like, we just loved it. We loved it. Now, is that in the interview on the page? No, but it's on a recording somewhere,
Mm-hmm.
probably on my bookshelf as I turn and look for that recorder. But at the same time, it was a great conversation, and I learned so much from that interview. And I love to do that. Like, that's the kind of interview I love. And I know that now there's Zoom and recordings and FaceTime and all that kind of stuff. And it's just a different kind of interview, right? Like, there was during that interview with Rosanna, for example, we burst out laughing because, we were talking about, being young and brown in Winnipeg in 1999. You know what I mean? Like, just some of that is just there, and it builds relations. And I think it builds positive relations when you're looking at someone and having a conversation with them. I know Clarice in the upcoming issue with the new poet laureate from Winnipeg, Duncan Mercady. I think they did that, over the phone, just so that there could be like a conversation back and forth. It's better than, sending out a bunch of questions and then having someone just respond back, which I think is also vital too. A lot of people may not have time to have a coffee or whatever, but yeah, I really do like having that conversation face to face. Okay, so you asked me what question would I ask myself. Um, well, I guess I would ask, what am I writing now? I suppose that would be, but I'm, writing nonsense at the moment because, I'm being a professor, I'm finishing a short story collection. Yeah, there's lots of other things going on. I've been reading a lot of other people's work just with the nature of the residency. And I'm excited about all the work that's out there that people are coming to me with, like a lot of South Asian writers who, Punjabi Sikh writers who I've been waiting for this moment, for all of these great South Asian writers to write their lives and to write it in poetic form. And so I've been reading lots of their work and like responding back and, telling them, okay, listen, chai might be done now. We might have to do another, right? Like everyone knows, chai poems or roti poems, but we might not be done yet. We might need a lot more of them, to get out there. So I'm excited about reading. I'm writing carefully, probably more carefully, writing poetry more carefully, I think, than I ever have before. And partly because of all of these new people coming out and going, oh, I could do this. I could write this. Yeah.
What do you mean by carefully in that context? I'd be interested to know.
Just, I want to say slowly, like just like Seva for me was a 10-year process. Like that book, that took me a good 10 years to write. And then it took Micheline Mailer, that editorial, she's great. So it took her eye to sort of say to me, you need a couple of little poems here and you're good. Like, this is a great collection. Pressure Cooker Love Bomb came about really quickly, I felt, like 2 years later after Seva. And I kept calling them the leftover poems. And Pressure Cooker Love Bomb, I mean, of course, that's great, right? Leftover. Ha ha ha. But at the same time, right, like now I'm just like, okay, what's that next book going to be? And you know, you have these kind of, or as a poet, as a writer, you have these kind of ideas, and then you have to figure out, is this a poem? Is this a collection? Is this a short story? Is this a play? Is
Mm.
this something else? And that's what I mean by carefully trying to find what genre this idea
Mm.
is going to be. And I've started a couple of, and this is how I got onto short stories, is because I had started this kind of collection about um, the public art pieces in Winnipeg or in Calgary. And I was in Winnipeg writing it. And then I thought, oh, well, I'm going to be in Calgary. I'm going to ride the C train around. And people who know me know that I don't ride the bus, but or the C train. Like, I would rather walk. But at the same time, I was like, oh, you know, in Calgary, for example, the most scenic places are where the cars are. You see the whole landscape of Calgary. And even with the C train up in the northwest, northeast, you can see the mountains, and they're beautiful. And so I started thinking about that and writing that into it, and realized, oh, this is not a poem. This is something a bit longer. So just learning that, right? And I only have 2 books. It's not like I have many, right? Where I've, you know, just like churning them out. I am sort of still new to putting whole collections together.
Mm. As we conclude, I wanted to mention that as I was over the course of the research in preparation, I noticed that the summer 2020 issue had sort of blurbed beside it a description of what the issue contained, and it concluded by acknowledging that the first poems of a particular poet who'd contributed and had been published in that issue. And I thought that was just a beautiful sort of acknowledgement that resonated with something you said earlier about how important it is for young poets getting their first publications. And on that point, I wonder whether, for those in the audience who are thinking about their first chapbook, or who are maybe considering submitting to a fine place like Contemporary Verse 2, what they might consider as they're going through that process. Perhaps something having to do with slowness, or maybe it comes about quickly, like Pressure Cooker Love Bomb, maybe more like a slow cooker. What kinds of advice would you offer to those who'd be considering their first couple of steps?
First couple of steps. Yeah, I would say read. Bottom line. Read the issue, read the journals that you want to be published in. It's very surprising when I hear other poets talk, and I'm like, well, what did you read this week? They're nothing. No, they don't read poems. I'm like, okay, well, you need to read. And that doesn't mean you need to read in a book. Like, a lot of my reading came from going to readings, right? Like going to poetry readings, creating a community. So either you're reading, or you're listening to poetry, you're listening to something, you know, a podcast or reading, what have you. So that's number one. First, read the journal that you want to be published in. Get a subscription, get it from the library, big borrow and steal issues. I don't know, do it. And then I would say, look at the submission page, look at the submission outline. Every journal is online now. Every journal has a submission, got guidelines. What are we going to publish? Sometimes there's a call, look for those calls. Make sure you kind of know, like, how many poems. So is it only 5 poems? Is it, you know, 6 pages, 6 poems? What are we looking for? And also read who's reading your work, right? So they will often, like, there's a little group of us that are reading, right? So, you know, it's Sharon Paul Ruprai, it's Hannah Green, it's Chim Oyundi, it's Clarice Foster. We're doing the reading. Does that resonate with you? Does our work resonate with you? Right? Like, and I say that only because you don't need to go out and, you know, buy everything, but what you need to do is just go, okay, is this the right place for this? Yeah. So, you know, reading, looking at the submission guidelines, making sure they're correct, following the submission guidelines to a T, and not going over the submission guidelines, and not having hurt feelings if you don't get, you know, that first time around you submit something and it comes back and you're like, oh, I didn't get published in this. Like, it is hurtful. I get it. I know. But at the same time, know that the readers, you know, we're reading constantly. right? And we've got something in mind, or there's an issue, there's a, you know, something that has resonated and has like created the whole issue.
Mm.
So you just don't know that kind of information, right? And we do try to be as transparent as possible, but also know with submittables, you know, we have a form letter, and there's a form letter for a reason. Anybody in publishing knows, as soon as you start opening up and edit, you know, like, oh, we'd like to edit this work, and it becomes a huge thing. So make sure that what you're submitting is perfect, is exactly the way you want it.
Mm.
Punctuation, capitals, all of that is so important. So important. Make sure it's perfect. So like, and I mean that, have other people read it. You know, get a group of friends together, get your poet collective together, read each other's work, print it off, see what it looks like on the page, and start editing. Does it make sense? Like, there's a lot of times when we get to the end of the poem, we're like, oh, they killed it with that last line. That's horrible. Oh, it ended too sentimental. Like, oh no, like it was so good up until this point, right? Or there's nothing worse than reading, and then you get to and then you're like, oh, it's perfect. Like on that first page, and then you get to the second, and it continues for 2 more pages, and you're like, no, that was the one page, right? Like, really and that's really being an editor of your own work, right? Like, that's your own work, or having other people edit for you, like, you know, reading it back and forth. And you just kind of know that after a while, right? Like, that's just something as soon as you start reading and editing, and looking at other people's work, you kind of know, like, okay, this is where it's going to go. So
Excellent. So the fall deadline, September 15th, the 2020 Young Buck Poetry Prize deadline is November 15th, and encourage you.
Yeah, I think it is.
So with one of the 4 poetry editors for Contemporary Verse to the Canadian Journal of Poetry and Critical Writing, Sharon Paul Rue-Pride. This has been episode 11 of Talking with the Press, is presented by Poetry London Online. Sharon Paul, thank you so much for this conversation. It's been a delight.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me, and thank you for having CV2 on this list. It's great.
Take care.
All right, you too. Thanks.